feeling of having performed something tremendously valuable for the people of this godless country was overpowering. And then he concludes, "So I never let a day pass without saying Mass. It was my primary concern each new day. I would go to any length, suffer any inconvenience, run any risk to make the bread of life available to these men." What profound words. And when we think about how easy it is for us to attend Mass, to receive our daily bread, the Holy Eucharist, these words help us to appreciate more deeply this gift that is ours this morning at this Holy Mass. And so today's readings, we can reflect upon some anticipations of what Jesus would institute in the Eucharist at the Last Supper. You know, in John's Gospel, he relates three Passovers. He mentions three Passovers in his Gospel. The one is in chapter 2. What happened in chapter 2? The wedding at Cana in Galilee, where Jesus turns water into wine. This super wine, this super special wine that's better, like the best was kept till the last, is what the steward said. And this, we are told, happened just a few days before Passover. So Jesus turns water into wine. Then the next Passover that John relates was what Matthew relates in today's Gospel from Matthew 14. This is in John chapter 6. And again, he tells us this happened just a few days before Passover. And it was a multiplication of the loaves and the fish. And what do we hear in Matthew's Gospel here? It was something that Jesus gives. At first, he's moved with pity for these people. His heart's moved with pity for them. We could think of the gift of the Eucharist as something that comes from his heart, from the love of his heart, his concern for us, that we have what is needed to sustain us. And these four verbs that we heard in Matthew's Gospel, we hear in the Mass during the consecration. That Jesus took, blessed, broke, gave. He took, blessed, broke, and gave. And those are words that we hear, I know, in the first Eucharistic prayer, the Roman canon. So this too is an anticipation, and it happens just a few days before Passover. And Jesus gives this food to his disciples, and they're the ones that then give it to the people. This, again, this miraculous food. That there's abundance left over. And what do we hear? That they all ate and were satisfied. And then the third Passover that John relates is in John chapter 13, where he relates Jesus washing the feet. And we learn again, this is just before Passover. So these three Passovers all point and anticipate this gift of the Eucharist that would be given on the final Passover of our Lord's life, where his passion, death, and resurrection take place. And he takes, blesses, breaks, and gives that which will be his body, that which will be his blood. So this is that super substantial food that the Lord would give us. Dr. Brant Petrie, who for his doctoral dissertation at Notre Dame University studied the Jewish history and the Jewish faith. And he wrote a wonderful book. It's a very intriguing book called Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, where he shows again how the Jewish faith was an anticipation of what Jesus would institute in the Eucharist. And he says something quite remarkable, that what the Jewish people were especially looking for was that when the Messiah would come, that he would bring about a new exodus. So Moses, we've been reading about this exodus from Egypt of the people, but this new Messiah is going to bring about somehow a new exodus, a new liberation, and also that he's going to give, there's going to be the miracle of the manna that's going to happen again. We heard that in the first reading of the manna, the miracle of the manna, the bread that would come from heaven. And Dr. Petrie points out that this was something also that the Jews were anticipating, that when the Messiah came, there would be again this new miracle of the manna. And he quotes an ancient Jewish writing, the second Baruch. And here's what that writing says. And it will happen that the Messiah will begin to be revealed. And those who are hungry will enjoy themselves. And they will, moreover, see marvels every day. And it will happen at that time that the treasury of manna will come down again from on high. And they will eat of it in those years, because these are they who have arrived at the consummation of time. So they were anticipating that once again this manna would be given from on high. What would Jesus say? I am the bread come down from heaven. So he is bringing about this new miraculous food that the others, all these figures anticipated, they looked toward, but now it's going to be consummated, it's going to be completed in the gift of the Eucharist. Something that Father Walter Ciszek and the prisoners that were there experienced the reality of that. And as he said, the experience was very real. You can feel its effects upon your mind and heart, upon your daily life. I was speaking with someone recently who was interested in the Catholic faith. And I was talking about, we have the teachings of 2,000 years, and it's important for us to look at, well, what did the early Christians do? How did they worship God? What did they do? It's an important question for all Christians. And if you read the early Christian writings, like St. Justin, you see that what they did is they united the synagogue service, the reading of the scriptures and the exhortation on those scriptures, together with what our Lord instituted at the Last Supper. That's the Mass. We have the liturgy of the Word. We have the liturgy of the Eucharist. That's what the Christians always did. And theologians and saints have come to deeper understandings and expressing this. And so over the centuries, we've had things like greater devotion through Eucharistic processions and adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. There's like this growing awareness and appreciation of this great treasure, this great gift that we have. So theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas could explain more deeply the understanding of how this is possible, that Jesus gives us his body, his blood, soul, and divinity. But it wasn't just the understanding of theologians, as important as that is, and helps us to understand that our faith is reasonable, but it's also the experience of the faithful. How those like the martyrs in North Africa that Pope Benedict mentions, the martyrs of Abitene, said, we can't live without the Lord. So they continued to gather for the Mass even when it was forbidden to do so, and eventually were martyred. Or in more recent times in Mexico during the persecutions that Blessed Miguel Pro suffered martyrdom, or in Ireland, or many other places. That it was a massive matter because people experienced that there was something more profound of the Lord's presence, the reality of his presence with them in the Eucharist, that he was with them in a more profound way than any other way. And they didn't want to be deprived of that. And so as Father Walter Ciszek concluded, I never let a day pass without saying Mass. It was my primary concern. I would go to any length, suffer any inconvenience, run any risk to make the bread of life available for these men and for himself too. That's our treasure. All of these things anticipated, they pointed toward what Jesus would ultimately, the Messiah, would ultimately bring, this new bread from heaven that sustains us in our exodus, our journey of being liberated from sin and enslavement to the devil through the waters of baptism, fed with this miraculous bread that the Lord gives us from heaven, so that we too may reach our true homeland of heaven.